The guest in room 214 had been checked in for 11 days, and in all that time, no one had seen his face. I worked the front desk at a mid-size hotel off the interstate. Not a dive, not a luxury property, just one of those clean, forgettable places where business travelers and road trippers pass through without much fuss. Most guests were in and out in 2 or 3 nights. The man in room 214 wasn't most guests. He'd checked in on a Monday, paid for 3 nights up front in cash, which was unusual but not unheard of. He gave a name, David Marsh, and a license plate number for our records. No car was ever in the lot that matched it. I noticed that on day 2, but honestly didn't think much of it at the time. By day 4, housekeeping flagged his room. He had the "Do Not Disturb" sign out every single morning. That's allowed. Guests can decline service. But on day 4, one of our housekeepers, Rosa, told me she could hear the television through the door every time she passed. Always on, always the same channel. Just the weather station, all day, every day. We had a soft policy. After 3 consecutive days of declined service, a manager was supposed to do a wellness check. My manager, Paul, knocked on the door that afternoon. He said the man answered almost immediately, like he'd been standing right behind it. Paul described him as unremarkable, middle-aged, average height, wearing a collared shirt, polite. Said he just valued his privacy and was in town for work. Paul came back to the desk and said everything was fine. But I noticed he didn't really make eye contact with me when he said it. Days passed. The man would come down to the lobby once each evening, always around 10 p.m., always after the small convenience area near the elevator closed. He'd stand at the vending machine at the end of the hall for a few minutes. Sometimes he'd buy something. Sometimes he'd just stand there. Then he'd go back upstairs. On day 8, I was covering a late shift. Around midnight, I got a call from the guest in room 216, directly next door to him. She said she'd been hearing sounds through the wall. Not loud sounds. She described it as rhythmic, like someone rearranging furniture, over and over. She'd been hearing it for several nights, but hadn't wanted to complain. She said what finally made her call was that it had stopped suddenly, and the silence felt worse than the sound. I radioed our overnight security, a guy named Cal. He went upstairs and stood in the hallway outside 214. He came back down and told me he hadn't heard anything. But then he said something that I've turned over in my mind probably 100 times since. He said the gap under the door was dark, completely dark, like something was pressed up against the other side of it. But when he knocked, the man answered calmly, same as before. Said he was sorry if he'd disturbed anyone. On day 11, David Marsh checked out, early morning before most of the staff arrived. He left the key cards on the bed, which people sometimes do. Rosa went in to turn the room over. She came and found me within about 2 minutes. She didn't say anything, just led me back upstairs. The room was immaculate, more than immaculate. The furniture had been moved, not haphazardly but precisely, pushed to the edges of the room to create a large open space in the center. The carpet in that open space had been scrubbed. You could see it, a slightly different texture where something had been cleaned very thoroughly. The television was still on, Weather Channel. We called the police. They came, took photos, ran the name David Marsh. No matches in any system that meant anything. The license plate came back to a car reported stolen 18 months earlier in another state. They never found out who he was. They never told us what they thought he'd been doing in that room for 11 days. And in a way, I think that was the part that stayed with me the most. Not knowing. I found the logbook under the front desk on my first week working nights, and what was written inside it made me wish I had taken the day shift. The hotel had been operating for about 30 years. Medium-sized, family-owned, the kind of place with a pool that was open 4 months out of the year and a breakfast bar that smelled like powdered eggs. I was 23, fresh out of a gap year, and the overnight front desk job felt easy enough. Minimal guests, quiet lobby, just me and whatever was on the security monitors. The logbook was unofficial, not a corporate document, just a standard spiral notebook that previous overnight staff had been quietly passing down. The entries went back nearly a decade. Most of it was mundane. Guest complaints, strange requests, notes about the ice machine on floor 3 being unreliable. But one name appeared in the entries more than any other. Room 108. The entries about 108 weren't dramatic. That's what made them unsettling. They were plain, factual, the way you write something down because you want someone else to know it without sounding like you've lost your mind. Things like, motion sensor in 108 hallway triggered 4 times between 2 and 4 a.m. No guest checked in. Maintenance found nothing. And further back, guest in 108 checked out 6 hours early, left without requesting a refund, wouldn't say why. And one from a few years before that. New overnight hire quit after first shift alone. Refused to explain. Will not return calls. I asked Marcus, the day shift supervisor, about the room. He was quiet for a moment, then said it had a history of plumbing issues and that guests sometimes complained about noise from the pipes. He said it in the tone people use when they're giving you an answer that isn't actually an answer. Room 108 sat at the far end of the ground floor, past the side exit, in a section of the building that was older than the rest. The corridor leading to it was slightly narrower, and the overhead light in that hallway had a flicker that maintenance had apparently never fully resolved. I had no reason to go down there on most nights, until a guest called down at 2 in the morning asking for extra towels. Room 107. Right next door. I pulled the towels from the supply closet, walked the corridor, and delivered them without incident. But on my way back, I slowed down outside 108. The room was unoccupied. Had been for 3 days, according to our system. I stood there for a moment, and I want to be precise about what I experienced, because I have thought about how to describe it many times. There was a smell. Not rot, not mildew. Something more like a smell you associate with a room that has been occupied for a long time by the same person. Lived in. Warm. Coming from under the door of an empty room. I didn't open the door. I walked back to the desk. The following week, I mentioned it to Elena, a housekeeper who had worked there for 9 years. She didn't seem surprised. She told me that twice in her time there she had gone into service 108 and found the bed looking slept in despite no guest being assigned to it. Sheets disturbed, pillow with an impression. Both times the room had been confirmed vacant in the system. Both times she remade the bed and told no one except in the logbook. She said something else that I've never fully shaken. She said she'd started noticing that guests who stayed in 108 rarely slept. She could tell from the trash. No used coffee cups, no sleep masks, just the television guide left open on the bed. Like they'd spent the whole night sitting up, waiting for something. Or watching. I worked that hotel for 7 months. I never stayed late near that hallway. I never looked directly into the gap under the door of room 108. And when I finally left, I added my own entry to the logbook. I kept it short, just, the smell is real. Don't stand there too long. She had been in the bathroom for 6 hours, and the only sound coming from the room was the faucet running. I was working security at a hotel in the city. Downtown property, nicer than average, the kind that hosts conferences and anniversary weekends. My shift ran 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights it was lost keycards and noise complaints. That night was different. The call came from housekeeping. One of the early morning staff had noticed that the water in room 412 had been audible from the hallway for most of the night. The faucet, running continuously. She'd knocked, no answer. She called the desk, who called me. The guest, a woman who had checked in alone the previous afternoon, had given no indication of anything unusual. She'd checked in with a credit card, smiled at the desk agent, asked about the gym hours. Normal, in every way. The room was paid for 2 nights. I knocked 4 times, announced myself as security. Nothing. I used the master key and opened the door. The room was dim, curtains drawn. The bathroom door was shut, light on underneath it, and I could hear the faucet clearly now, cold water by the sound of it, running into the sink. I crossed the room and knocked on the bathroom door, and she answered. Calm voice, said she was fine, said she just needed a few more minutes. I stood in the middle of that hotel room and tried to decide what to do. I had no reason to force entry into the bathroom. She'd spoken, she sounded coherent. But something was wrong, in a way I couldn't name yet. The room didn't look like someone had been in it for 16 hours. The bed was untouched. Her suitcase was open on the luggage rack, but nothing had been taken out of it. Her phone was on the desk, face up, screen off. No charger plugged in. I told her through the door that I needed to see her in person to confirm she was okay, that it was hotel policy. A long silence. Then she unlocked the door and opened it. She was fully dressed, coat still on, the same one she'd checked in wearing. She was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, and the sink was running full blast. She looked at me with an expression I still find difficult to describe. Not distress, exactly, more like someone who had been in the middle of a thought for a very long time and resented being interrupted. I asked if she needed any assistance, medical, personal, anything. She shook her head slowly. I asked if there was someone I could call for her. She looked at the running water for a moment, then back at me. She said, I just needed somewhere no one could find me. I asked if someone was looking for her. She didn't answer that. She reached over and turned off the faucet, stood up, smoothed the front of her coat. She asked me, very politely, if I could give her another hour. I called my supervisor. We agreed someone needed to stay nearby. I sat in the hallway outside room 412 for the next 40 minutes. At some point, the sounds inside stopped entirely. Not in a way that alarmed me, just in the way that a room goes quiet when someone has settled. At 6 a.m, she came out, suitcase packed, coat buttoned. She walked to the elevator, and I followed at a distance. She checked out at the front desk, paid the remaining balance, and walked out of the hotel into the early morning. No one in the lobby gave her a second glance. I wrote up the incident report. My supervisor reviewed it, said there was nothing we could officially flag since she'd been responsive and had checked out voluntarily. He filed it, and that was the end of it. I've thought about her more than I've thought about almost anything else from that job. Not because of what she did, but because of what she said. Somewhere, no one could find her. I've never been able to decide whether she meant that as something frightening, or whether for her, it was the only thing that had felt like relief in a very long time.